Welcome, everybody. This program is End of Life Issues, Part 1, Difficult Conversations with Rabbi Ron Goldberg. And thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I would like to thank Women's League International President, Debbie Kaner-Goldich, who did not flinch when I proposed this series last year. And she introduced me to Rabbi Ron, helping to make tonight's program a reality. I'm going to introduce Debbie in a few moments to just say a few words, but I just want to remind everybody on this evening's program that there are many terrific Women's League programs available to our members, whether you're a member of an affiliate sisterhood or Women's League group or have joined as an individual member. Check out This Week in Women's League to see all of the upcoming programming. And I want to point out, especially coming up in February, the Masorti Women's Days of Study, which Women's League supported on Giving Tuesday. Those are all coming up in February. There are multiple sessions. They look fabulous. And I also would like to remind everybody to join us for part 2 of this series on Thursday, March 30th at 8 p.m., when we will present a session on hospice with Rabbi David Rosen and other team members from the Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network, which is based in West Bloomfield, Michigan. So allow me now to introduce our Women's League International President, Debbie Kaner-Goldich.
Thank you, Mindy. Let me just say that I didn't flinch because having gone through end-of-life issues with my own parents, I was fascinated by the topic, and I know that many of us have gone through those same issues. So I thank you for bringing this to the forefront. I want to welcome Rabbi Ron and to say that I know him very long time. I know him when he was a student at Ziegler, and I know he has a wonderful reputation as a chaplain. So he was the first person that I thought of when you said that you wanted a rabbi to talk about this. So I'm anxious to hear him, and I know the rest of you are. So let's get to it.
We also have our executive director, Rabbi Ellen Wallens-Fields, with us tonight. Rabbi Ellen, you want to say hello?
Good to see everybody this evening, and thank you for being with us. And it's always good to hear from a colleague as well. And Mindy, thank you for organizing, and Karen for working our tech.
All right. So back when I was in my medical training in the olden days, as my daughter would say, we lived by the dictum of see one, do one, and teach one. And the saying really encapsulates the idea that we would learn by observing first, then doing, and then sharing our knowledge with others. And it's really the essence behind this series. In 2021, my elderly cousin who had no immediate family became ill, and then became seriously ill, and then became clear he was terminally ill. Everything happened very quickly, and it really made me think about other end-of-life experiences I've had in my family. And made me think about what we could have done better, both for my cousin and for other family members. And it also makes me think about what we can all do better as we move forward. For all of us, these experiences are inevitable. So I've seen, I've done, and now Rabbi Goldberg is here to teach us how to do something most of us would rather not spend a lot of time thinking about. Rabbi Goldberg was born in Chicago, Illinois, but relocated with his family at the advanced age, according to him, of 6 months to Los Angeles, and then to the rural San Fernando Valley. In the early 60s, it was the home of horse and chicken ranches and endless orange groves. Rabbi Ron grew up in a traditional conservative movement home and attended Hebrew school at Temple Beth Ami of Reseda, California. He graduated Cal State Northridge with a degree in business administration. Rabbi Ron worked many years in commercial banking and also was congregational president of the synagogue he grew up in and had his bar mitzvah at. The rabbinate is a second career for Rabbi Ron. And with the collapse of the financial markets in 2008, his Israeli-American wife and Women's League member advised him that since financial services had imploded, he needed to do something else. With the support of his wife, Judy, Ron entered the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, completing all aspects of the program, including the Israeli year. And while at the Ziegler School, he interned for 2 years at Beit Shuvah, a Jewish faith-based residential substance abuse center. After ordination, Rabbi Ron started working at LA Jewish Health, formerly the LA Jewish Home, where he's been since 2015. He and his wife Judy enjoy their blended family, which includes between them 5 children, 4 daughters-in-law, and 5 grandchildren. So now I'm going to turn the program over to our guest speaker, Rabbi Ron.
You know, you would think after 3 years of Zooming, I would know to unmute myself automatically and it would just be natural. Good evening, everybody. Again, thank you, Mindy, for inviting me. Thank you, Debbie, for thinking of me. And I'll do my best to live up to the intro. I'm going to own up to being, and I was telling this off group to Rabbi Ellen, being just a little bit nervous. My wife and Women's League member is on the Zoom also. And I have no doubt when I get home, there will be a Israeli critique of how I did or didn't do this evening. But that being said, let's talk about a couple of different things as kind of a preamble and kind of set the stage for how we'll go ahead and do things. And Mindy, I could use your help as we go through some of this. There's a number of topics to cover. My first inclination is to say, let's talk about one topic, set the stage for it, and then maybe take questions or observations from people and see if there's a conversation. I'm not a great lecturer, but I'm pretty good at conversation and discussion, and particularly since I'm sure we have, in addition to Rabbi Ellen here, other learned people in the group, I'm a big believer in the theory of nobody teaches, everybody learns. And my goal would be to leave our discussion this evening knowing more than I did when I walked in the door, and I'm confident of that. In Judaism, we're very, very comfortable with the idea of a multitude of answers. By that, I mean that there's very rarely a single answer to a given question. If you study Talmud at all, you discover that they'll ask a question and you'll discover Rabbi Yossi says the answer is blue, Rabbi Yaakov says it's green, and the sages say it's yellow. And we're perfectly okay with that. We're good with that ambiguity. We're good with those multiple answers. Within our Jewish world, we have 3 major movements: Reform, Orthodox, Conservative. And even within those movements, you generally don't have unity of answer on any given topic. And certainly end of life is not going to be any different. We like the idea of debate. We like the idea of argument. There's a classic joke one of my colleagues tells here on campus an awful lot. The rabbi arrived to a new congregation and he was curious as to what their customs were for reciting Shema. One week he had them stand up, people were upset. One week he let them sit, people were upset. So we asked his ritual committee, what should we do? What's the answer here? And they said, you know what? We don't know. Let's go ask Morris Greenberg. He's been here for 1,000,000 years. Let's ask him. So they went to Morris Greenberg and they said, Morris, is the tradition here to stand up for Shema? He says, no, I don't remember that. That it must be to sit down for the Shema. He says, no, I don't remember that either. And they say, well, we're arguing about it. And Morris says, yes, that I remember. And that very much is the Jewish approach to any number of issues. So we're going to go with that. Our goal is to kind of set the table and be clear that end of life is not one of the funner topics in Judaism. Let's call it what it is. This isn't baby naming. This isn't bar mitzvah. This isn't planning a wedding. Those all have their own unique challenges, but this is not a simcha. Okay? And it's a difficult time. In the best of circumstances, it's a very difficult moment. So let's acknowledge that on square one and then go forward. The goal here is to make people comfortable with the idea that family can make decisions and choices in advance. And that's important to work with and seek the advice of a rabbi whose judgment you respect and whose advice you want to solicit. Each rabbi has their own history and experiences and teachers. I am a rabbi in the conservative movement, so I'll try to share some ideas from the Reform movement and from the Orthodox world, but most of my thinking and ideas are going to come from the conservative movement. When I have questions about medicine, about Jewish medical ethics and practice, I have 2 major go-to written sources that I look at, and I'll share them with you just visually real quickly. The first one is called A Jewish Guide to Practical Medical Decision-Making. It's by my colleague here at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, Rabbi Jason Weiner. He's from the Orthodox world, a very fine man, a compassionate man. His ideas here very much come from the Orthodox world, but I find them an interesting starting point. Being a student at the Ziegler School, of course, I was blessed to have many a class with Rabbi Elliot Dorff, one of the great medical minds, one of the philosophical minds of our generation. He wrote a book that I rely on an awful lot, simply called Matters of Life and Death. And in here, he tries to explain the Jewish ideas about facing end of life, of actually any number of issues, but particularly when I look at end of life stuff, I often find myself referring to his book to get a starting point. The big starting point I want to go with to begin with is at end of life, decision making is hard. One of the worst things that happens to people is suddenly having to be in the position to make a decision they didn't want to make. So there are a couple of steps that any family can take, any person can take to alleviate this from being a major headache, a major trauma, and a major heartache for their family. First document is called a durable power of attorney. And it's just what it sounds like. A durable power of attorney designates somebody to make healthcare decisions when a person is not able to do it on their own. So when a person is in a vegetative state, if they're unconscious, if they're unable to be responsive, if they're not able to give an informed, competent answer, having the durable power of attorney simplifies matters enormously. And it also designates in advance who's going to be making those decisions. One of the things in the rabbinate you get to see is sometimes families are not as unified or as single-minded as you would like. And all of a sudden, in moments of stress, there can be a lot of argument and a lot of dissent, a lot of discord. Durable power of attorney designating somebody as being the person can alleviate that an awful lot. Now, we wonder sometimes what is a patient's desire in given situations? And there's an instrument called an advanced directive for healthcare. Mindy, I put a copy, that's the link that I sent you. Mm-hmm. The conservative movement, the Rabbinic Assembly, has such a document. Rabbi Dorff, I think, was instrumental in helping write this, and it's one that he recommends that people complete. What it does basically is it gives everybody a directive of what are a person's wishes. Do they want extraordinary life-saving measures? Do they want to be resuscitated? Do they want to have feeding tubes and other extraordinary measures? Do they want to be intubated with a breathing device? The advanced directive helps people see that, and we're going to put that into the chat. Mindy, is that the easy way to do this?
Yes.
So it's a PDF form. We're going to put it into the chat for people who want to take a look at it. It's on the Rabbinic Assembly webpage, but it's something very much worthwhile in taking some time on. Final document is called an ethical will. And in simple terms, an ethical will is our words and admonitions we leave for our friends and family. Finishing up the book of Genesis, we had Yaakov giving blessings to all of his children. This is very similar to that. It's a chance to share your thoughts with your family, advice for the future, your wishes and blessings. But those are three devices that people should very much take advantage of. Really, in particular, the advanced directive for healthcare, and the link is now in the chat, and the durable power of attorney. Mindy, this is for me is kind of a good pausing point. If people want to throw up ideas, questions, and I'm good with that now. If that works for you.
That works for us. We can do that. We can put some things in the chat if people want to go ahead and put things in the chat. Karen will open it. You should note for things like a durable power of attorney that people need to do that with a lawyer.
Yes, absolutely. It is a legal document, so you want it to be watertight, for lack of a better phrase. You don't want to have it contested after the fact. You want to have, I'm going to use the phrase unity of purpose. End of life is one of those times where you don't want to have conflict as to who the actual, I don't want to say decision maker, but decision maker is. Certainly, the family member would take input from other family members, but you want to have that nailed down in advance. You want to have it written. You want to have it recorded. So absolutely do it with the advice of attorney.
And let people know where these documents are. If nobody can find them, nobody knows who the attorney is, and nobody knows where you put them, they're not going to be helpful in the moment.
Good point. So obviously making sure that a spouse knows, making sure that making sure the person who you've designated as your power of attorney, it's important to make sure they're aware of that. You don't want to have them be surprised at the last minute. And there's also a chance to go over with them, again, what your wishes are and your philosophies are on so many different issues.
So Debbie's asking, are any of these documents written specifically for Jewish people?
I know the one on the Rabbinic Assembly that we're putting up there, the advanced directive specifically is. And I'm going to guess on the durable power of attorney, we're a nationwide group, right, Mindy? We're across the country here?
Yeah, across the country and Canada.
Very cool. So my observation would be is that each jurisdiction probably has its own particular legal quirks and guidelines, and that one should consult an attorney in their area and a rabbi in their area for what would be specific to that to you. I would suspect that a durable power of attorney that's written in Toronto I'd like to think would be honored in Chicago, but yeah, that's a question for an attorney to answer.
But you can have, I do know this from personal experience, your power of attorney or your healthcare proxy, which is something many people have signed just going into a hospital for a procedure, doesn't have to be somebody who is in your location. They can be anywhere. They have to know that they're the person you're appointing, and so they can be anywhere. It's just so that people know who to call, who to speak to, so they can be anywhere. It's the legalities of the document are specific to the location that you're in. It may require, something may require being notarized, so there are the issues for the location, but the person you designate can be anywhere. They don't have to be where you are. You're not constrained by that.
I see we have a question in the chat, so I'm going to try to address it. What is a durable and not just a power of attorney? So durable means just what it implies, that typically with power of attorney, creating an agency relationship, if the principal doesn't have capacity to act or is deceased, the power of attorney may not survive that. Durable means that it's specifically for those purposes. If there's somebody who's got more legal advice than that, feel free to offer it. But I think, Mindy, that's the intent of durable, is that it's going to survive the principal being unable to speak for themselves, is the whole idea.
I believe that is the whole idea. They don't do a whole lot of legal training in medical school.
Yeah, and in today's day and age, how sad is that, right? Other questions on this topic? Okay, let's go on to the next thing. End of life. The major issue in America is beginning of life, the whole abortion thing. When does life begin is a basic question that goes with that. We're looking at the other end. Oh, how does one find a reputable attorney? Those just got typed in. That's an interesting question. I know for myself, asking the advice of friends who have needed similar services is generally the best way. And Mindy's agreeing with me on that one. So again, if you have friends who have needed similar services and been happy with the service, that's a good starting point. End of life issues that come up that people have to deal with. Oh, yes, and I'm also being reminded that as rabbis, there's a lot of things we do, but we do not give legal advice. That's just outside, it's outside our portfolio, it's outside of our genre. So we ask me a question about, is this treif or not? I have a fighting chance. If you're asking me about legalities, I'm going to refer you to a qualified attorney in my area. Let's talk about a couple of things having to do with end of life. We've all become very familiar with this word quality of life. Okay, quality of life. Is this person having, what does the person's quality of life look like? In Judaism, this isn't such a big issue. We're concerned with the idea that life is sacred, that life is a gift from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that we do every reasonable effort to preserve life. Okay, so that's where we're at. Now, within the different movements, there's some different philosophies about end of life issues beyond that. So let's talk about the idea of suffering. You'll hear that phrase, suffering is good for the soul. That's not a Judaic idea. We don't think that suffering is ennobling. We don't think that suffering enhances character. We like the idea that working towards a goal, struggling towards a goal, that has value. But beyond that, we don't think that suffering for its own sake is a character building. There's a piece of Talmud. Two rabbis are visiting a colleague, and they ask him, "Is your suffering dear to you?" And he says, "No, of course not." So we don't go for that. Alleviating suffering is something we very much believe in. So, for example, medications. Are we good with medications? Let's start with kind of a fun one. I get asked every now and then about medical marijuana. What does Judaism say about that? Is that accepted therapy? We're okay with that. Medical marijuana enhances appetite. It's not really great at pain killing, but it enhances appetite. It helps with nausea. If it's the bigger issue is this idea of, is it legal in your jurisdiction? And that's another question to answer, but we're okay with that. But controlling pain, using narcotics under a doctor's supervision, we're absolutely okay with that. You're going to be talking with hospice, I think, next session. It'll be a very big topic for them. It's a topic for us also this evening. With modern medications from the opiates and other families, we can control pain. Pain can be pretty effectively controlled. The question becomes for us at end of life is sometimes those medications are not healthy. Morphine over time is not healthy for a person. It can degrade other aspects of life. Questions on this part so far? Okay. I get a question I get asked a lot. Going back to that quality of life thing, what does Judaism say about suicide or assisted suicide? And I think everybody here is going to know the answer to that is pretty much no. That is not something that we do. Suicide is surrendering the biggest gift we have, our own lives. We don't encourage that. It's forbidden under halakha. Assisted suicide, the same thing. The person assisting with that is actually, quoting Rabbi Dorf, is considered a murderer. That's not something that we do. It comes up periodically as, somebody's quality of life, whatever that means, is degraded. Wouldn't it be better to assist them in moving on to the Olam Haba? And no, that's not Jewish thought. Right? It's just something we just don't do. Yeah, I'm getting, we see the note here. If someone is in great pain, assisted suicide is a no. Great pain, again, in modern medicine, the idea is that we have a fighting chance to control that with modern pain-killing medications. Questions about suicide or assisted suicide? Okay. Let's go into the deep water then. if one is lucky when it comes to end of life, you have the experience I had with my own father. Zichrono livracha. He went to bed one evening and he left us in his sleep. Okay, as far as we know, it was peaceful, it was painless, and there was no issues. There was no decision making. There was no debate. There was no, oh my gosh, he peacefully left our world. And in a lot of ways, I'm grateful for that. But the idea being that there are other issues that come into play at end of life when somebody is suffering greatly. What are the limits of care? What are some of the issues we come up with? So let's start with the first one. Let's say, do not resuscitate. Let's go to heroic measures. So heroic measures would be like applying emergency CPR, pulling out those paddles you always see on television, and everybody yelling clear and standing back. Okay. We want to save life, but a person might say, you know what? I don't desire heroic measures. One of an overarching theme in Judaism is that we believe in a natural world. We believe in a world where, we come into this world, we live, and our lives are finite, that we're going to leave this world. So we're okay with the idea of the natural progression of life, and that death is a natural part of that we accept that. So a person might say, I don't want heroic measures. We're okay with that. Questions about that? I have one person typed in, end-stage Parkinson's, patients will die in agony, still no assisted suicide. I'm going to say again, still no assisted suicide. That is very much an overarching theme. Now, that questions about what I was just talking about before I go on.
So I think, something that people that's why people need to have conversations, is because they need to know when they might say no heroic measures or when they might be open to heroic measures. And that's a conversation that people need to have. And I think, that's an issue that sometimes people don't have it. So somebody with end-stage Parkinson's, somebody with terminal cancer, or somebody who is going in for routine procedure where death is not expected for that. So, people need to keep in mind there are different scenarios and not everything is equal. So that's why people need to have conversations. Conversations,
communication. Like I said, we said on square one, Mindy, these are the difficult conversations. Mm-hmm. It isn't the funner stuff in life, but it's the type thing, particularly, life happens. And some of us, if you remember the Nixon administration, you probably are getting to that point in life to where these are things that you need to be aware of and to begin to plan for. Talking again about extraordinary measures. So, how does Judaism feel about somebody who's in a vegetative state? Okay, somebody who's in a coma. So this goes back to I was talking earlier about the idea that we believe in a natural world and we allow nature to take its course. We have a challenge in today's world. It's called science. Science and technology are an amazing blessing to our world. They're a gift. All of our lives are better because of technology, because of science. Now, on the other hand, I used to visit a unit of comatose ventilator dependents at a local hospital here in Los Angeles. I remember a doctor saying to me, with enough, as long as the electricity holds up, and as long as the person has insurance to pay for it, between the ventilator and artificial feeding, we can pretty much keep somebody alive for an awful long time. So the question becomes, what does a family do with that? What do we do with a loved one who is in a vegetative state or is and can't make decisions for themselves, and they're being kept alive by artificial means, by using a ventilator, by being fed through maybe a G tube, a stomach tube, for example? how does Judaism regard that? Mindy, you look like you want to say something.
No, I think, these are things that I think, people don't ever think it applies to them or their family until it does.
Fair enough. Exactly. Until it does, it's somebody else's problem. So this is where there's some differences of opinion. This is where you start having both a majority and a minority of opinion, or a stringent opinion and a more lenient opinion. I tend to lean towards some of the more lenient ideas. So for example, somebody's in a vegetative state. The first question that you begin to ask is, are we treating them to cure, or are we just maintaining life? And those are two separate things. So is the therapy and treatment the person in a vegetative state going through to bring them out of that state, to bring them back to our world, to bring them back to consciousness? Or are we just elongating their life? And there becomes a lot of questions that begin to come into play. How long is a reasonable time to hold somebody in this state? If we're feeding them artificially, you have a number of problems with that. So for example, where I work here in my work, we have patients who sometimes need to be fed intravenously, sometimes have to be fed by a stomach tube. The problem with both these things is, number one, if you're being fed intravenously, the veins aren't designed, by our creator to be fed that way, and they begin to collapse. And a stomach tube involved in the intravenous tube both bring on the risk of terrible infection. That infection is also detrimental to the person. And as much as the nursing staff does their best to keep them clean, to keep them free of infection, it is a real danger. So there's a lot of thought. The traditional answer would be that once you put somebody onto a ventilator, once you put something onto a stomach tube for feeding, you don't take them off. That would be the traditional answer. Okay, and then the challenge becomes, the hardship to the family and to the loved ones is, how long can this condition go on? And we now know from experience, this can go on for literally years. Okay. The minority and somewhat more lenient opinion is that we allow nature to take its course. There's two themes that go with this. Is the person being they use the example in Jewish text of things that keep a person from progressing to death. The one is the external. So if somebody's out, so they use the example in Talmud of somebody chopping wood, this is keeping the person from progressing to dying. Or if they're putting salt on his tongue to stimulate thirst, is that keeping them from progressing into the next thing, into dying naturally? Because in neither case are you working on a cure. You're just keeping the person alive. So the more lenient strands, and again, it's a minority opinion, is it permissible to take somebody off of a feeding tube? Is it permissible to remove a ventilator? And the answer becomes yes. That if you're not doing these things to cure, you're just doing it to elongate life. The question becomes to some Jewish thinking that this is permissible to remove these artificial devices. Mindy, what are you thinking there?
I'm thinking that's the opinion that I personally would go with. But not everybody I know would agree with me, but that's the opinion where I would find myself having seen that a lot.
Again, you talked about the hard things for the hard discussion. Somebody's been in a coma for 30 days. Okay. You begin to reasonably say, if they were going to come out of this in the natural course of affairs, 30 days is a reasonable time to expect that. Now, after 30 days, again, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a doctor or a nurse, but you begin to see the body degrading. The muscles begin to atrophy, et cetera, et cetera. You're feeding them artificially. That brings on its own set of problems. Weight loss. There's more and more can go wrong. And I don't think you can ignore the tircha, the hardship this is for a family. I don't think that can be ignored entirely. You begin to look at what is the financial strength, what Most insurance policies have a lifetime benefit. You're going to hit that at some point. So you begin to say at 30 days out, in the traditional world, this is not a question. This is you're not going to be removing artificial devices. In the conservative world, this is a discussion that you can actively entertain. It's not a pleasant one, but it's one you can actually entertain. Can we remove a ventilator? Can we remove a stomach tube? Questions on that thought or observations on that? Pleasantly surprised, but okay. Does the Jewish hospice refuse assisted suicide? That's an interesting question. The question is, does a Jewish hospice refuse assisted suicide? My guess, okay, I'll speak for my own organization. The answer would be yes. We would decline that. Legal implications of removing a tube. Well, let me answer the first one first. Jewish hospice, generally, as I know from my own organization, assisting with suicide, assisting with leaving this world is something we would not take part in. The speakers you have in for the next installment might be able to answer that more nationally, but my la nolpa regel achad to answer on one leg. My thinking would be no. That's not a policy that they would support. Question was Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. I kind of have the same answer. I don't think that they would be assisting with suicide. I don't see that being a therapy that they would take part in. Legal implications of removing a tube if a patient is at home and disease is terminal. Again, I'm not an attorney, as I've been reminded earlier today, and I'm going to say it again. Speaking to the Judaic theory of that, the Judaic theory, we would the opinion of that feeding artificially is elongating life and not treating to cure. That feeding artificially is a medication and it's permissible to withhold medication to allow the natural progression of things. We under Judaism, you can make the argument to permit it. You will find arguments on both sides. Trying to keep up with these. Once New Jersey and other states, there is a law for medical aid in dying. This is not considered assisted suicide. Fair enough. Again, the civil law, the criminal law is outside my expertise. I will say that from the Jewish standpoint, assisting somebody in taking their life is not allowed. It's flat out forbidden. Somebody taking their own life is flat out forbidden. And we can come back to suicide. Actually, just a note on suicide. And we all grew up with that. If somebody is a suicide, they don't get buried in a Jewish cemetery. They're off. There's some other source for that. In our modern times, there's a stance that I've seen many rabbis apply here, that a person who takes their own life is actually an ill person. They're suffering from a mental illness. They're not in their right mind. They're not capable of making good decision, of making a qualified decision. So therefore, we're lenient, and we assume that they're suffering from a disease, and we treat it that way. What's the next question? Once a person has died, the tubes and/or intervention tools cannot be removed, even for tahara and burial. I'm not familiar with that because I'm just looking at the practical things, and maybe Rabbi Ellen has seen this differently. When somebody leaves, when somebody we have a patient transition here, disconnecting them from any medical equipment is pretty standard. So I'm not sure about that.
There are many Chevra Kadishas, the group that that do the Tahara, which is a purification of the body in preparation for the burial. Many people say that you're not supposed to take anything out of the body as to how it was for when the person died. They're different methods and thinking about, as you said at the very beginning, that there are different ways to do it, but there are many groups that won't take anything out of the body, and if they do, they don't want anyone but the Chevra Kadisha, the people who are doing that, to extract any of it.
And I will tell you that in the hospital, once a patient has died, they will generally remove all of the tubes and all of the things in the hospital. They will remove things from the patient in the hospital before the patient goes to the funeral home.
Yeah,
Right.
Mindy, that's my experience also. So that's an interesting question. But it just seems to be in a hospital setting, very much standard operating practice to remove all those things. It is important for the family to think about what the person would want and not want in regards to prolonging life. Okay, so the question or the statement was given to us, it is important for the family to think about what the person would want and not want in regards to prolonging life. Absolutely. Now we're back to square one where we began the discussion with the advanced directives, with the specifically addresses that very question. Thanks for the question, Sue, but that is exactly what an advanced directive helps you deal with. What if the condition is not terminal and it may improve and the person is on a feeding tube? Then if you remove it, you may be assisting in suicide. Person intubated 20 days may recover from infection. Okay, so the question is, again, with these extraordinary measures, how long do you maintain them? So if the condition's not terminal, then we're working on cure. That's an important distinction. We're working on curing the person, not prolonging life. So I think that's what Judith Aaron was saying to us. I basically agree with that. I'm not trying to keep the person alive artificially. I'm actively engaged in finding a cure for whatever illness they have so they can make a refuah shlema, a complete recovery. So I basically agree with what you're saying there. We're prolonging life in the cure. Okay. Right, I'm going to again echo what Rabbi Walensfields is saying to everybody. There is more than one pathway in Judaism. There's more than one rabbinic thought. And back to, again, something I said earlier, when you're seeking advice on all these matters, it should be with your rabbi, who you have a relationship with, and who you have a trusting relationship with. I would definitely put that out, that as being very, very important. Anything else on that issue? The tubes are an interesting thing. It is an artificial way of keeping somebody alive and of feeding them. Dementia is something we deal with an awful lot here at LA Jewish Health. And as the syndrome continues, the patient oftentimes loses the ability to chew, to swallow. Well, let's go with chewing first. So the first thing that we do when we begin to encounter that is we change their diet to what we call a puree diet or a liquid diet. When we get through with that, let's say that works for a while, but they lose the ability to swallow. We transfer them to, we have speech pathology come in and try to help them work through that, discover there's therapies that we can do that they can recover the ability to swallow. If it gets to the point where we're looking at putting somebody on artificial feeding, like I did this example of thickened liquid diet is when we do an awful lot, but if we're past that thickened diet isn't working, puree diet isn't working, we have to feed them artificially, that's where knowing the families and particularly the patient's advanced directive is really important, okay? We have cases where the family and the patient have made clear that, no, we don't want to be put onto tubes. We don't want to have this type of effort done on our behalf. In other cases, family said, let's go that direction. So it's important, again, back to that idea about an advanced directive, making sure that somebody has that. Question about a living will. I'm going to demur on answering that only because, again, I'm not an attorney. I got a question came to me directly, Mindy.
Okay.
About and Will, and it's outside my field of expertise. As a comment was made about a thickened liquid diet. What typically happens is, if people aren't familiar with it, you take it's called a thickener. I'm not even sure what's actually in it, but you would take, like when I do kiddush on Friday night here with my dementia population, some of them can take grape juice in its normal form. Some need a thickened diet, and it's basically a powder that we mix into the juice, and with that they can enjoy making kiddush with us. So it's something that we do make use of, but that's the step past that is when you get into artificial feeding. Mindy?
So my patients, typically did not have dementia because I'm a retired pediatrician. But I took care of a lot of patients who had other problems. And so, we did see this a lot. And of course, I've seen this with family members, and I've seen this with friends' families. And I think, what's important for people to also bear in mind is that things are ongoing conversations. So all the legal documents are good things, but these are also ongoing conversations to have, because what somebody might want for themselves when they're young and relatively healthy in their 30s is not necessarily what somebody's going to want as they get older, as their underlying health situation changes. So these are all ongoing conversations. And like we've said at the beginning, not easy to have, not fun to have, but these are ongoing conversations. It's not a one and done. It is an ongoing conversation to have with your loved ones, not just what they want, but also what you want for yourself.
Let me just piggyback on that a little bit, Mindy. Using dementia as kind of my stepping stool here. Nobody marries and pictures their spouse in dementia. It just is not something we visualize. And then it gets to, you want to make sure they have the best care possible, because it gets to a certain point in dementia where a spouse's ability to provide the care needed is severely taxed. And a lot of the patients that I come here, the family feels a little bit guilty about that. They feel like, oh, I'm abandoning my loved one. And let me just address that for a second. It's a little bit outside of our field, but I think it's relevant, Mindy, that you're not abandoning a loved one. We say the example would be like Fifth Commandment, honor your father and mother. So if you have the ability to take care of them, great. But it's also very, very legitimate in Jewish thought if their needs are beyond your ability to do, delegating that to an organization is perfectly fine. It's perfectly, you're in line with Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy, and it's something that can be done. The philosophical changes, like I said, when you're 25, besides me, who thought when they were 25 they were going to live forever, and that they would always be 25 and they would never be hurt, they'd never be sick, that everything would be wonderful. And as time goes by, we begin to realize this isn't the case. And this is where having some of these difficult discussions, while a person is still capable of making an informed decision, of making their wishes known and fully understood, is definitely the time to do it. I see we got an observation. When push comes to shove, some families override the loved one's advanced directives in emergency or crisis. That's a hard one. Nobody wants to see a loved one suffer or perceive that a loved one is suffering. Overriding a directive, again, it's a little outside my expertise. I would put out there that some years ago I was confronted with a situation. One of our resident in our care was in a very bad way healthcare wise. Her daughters were talking to me. Mom had just had a procedure where, to prevent a very severe infection from spreading, they had amputated her arm. And the doctors discovered subsequently that this was not a successful treatment, and that they would want to do an additional procedure. And the surgeon's observation was there's a 7 in 10 chance she won't survive the procedure. So the daughters asked me the question that as clergy, as a pastoral counselor, you never want to hear and you never want to answer. Well, you can hear, but you never want to answer this. Rabbi, what should we do? Okay. Pastoral counseling 101. That's not a question you answer. What you do try to do, and I did in this case, is try to lead the discussion. And this idea of like that came to us was, again, honor your mother and father. What honors her dignity the most? And I think, Mindy, when we talk about these end of life discussions, that's something that we leave out. What honors the dignity of the person we're talking about? What honors them, what respects them the most? And I think we can't ignore that component. And I think it's something that, we get wrapped up in medical genre and jargon, but really we're talking about a loved one and human dignity. And bear in mind, in Judaism, human dignity is ginormous. It's a huge issue that we have. We're very concerned about that. Does it protect their dignity? And I have found in the counselings that I do, when we have end-of-life situations, and we're wondering, what's the pathway? What pathway should the family be on? When we approach it from that standpoint of honoring mom and dad, of honoring dignity, it provides a fair amount of clarity to it.
No, that's absolutely true. But I have also seen this happen, that, people know what somebody's wishes are, but in the moment, the wishes do not get followed. So
Okay.
it happens.
That's legitimately hard. Okay, so if I know that Mrs. Green is very emphatic, no heroic measures, okay, that we have it in the advance directive. She's told me, she's told her daughters, she's told her physician, and she goes, she stops breathing, she goes into cardiac arrest. I can easily see in the moment that there would be, our first instinct, pikuach nefesh, to save a life. It would be to begin doing CPR, to begin calling the paramedics, getting the paddles out. I get that. I truly do. And this is, again, why we really need to have the discussion in advance to see what really is what they're looking for. It isn't easy. There is no two ways about it. Other questions on this aspect? Wow, I must be much more complete than I thought I was. Okay, let's go back to this idea about allowing natural process. Okay, when it comes to end of life, we very much believe, again, this idea that life is finite, that we come into this world, God gave us life, God takes our life, blessed be the name of the Lord. We're very much with that. We look very hard from a Judaic theological and philosophical standpoint. Keep in mind this idea of, are we doing treatment to cure? Or are we doing treatment to elongate life? And it's one of those key things as you're looking at these end-of-life decisions that might have to be made. What is the goal of the care plan? Okay, are we looking at curing, or are we looking at just prolonging life? One of the things that Rabbi Dorff talks about in his book, Matters of Life and Death, is a person is dying of kidney failure and then develops pneumonia. And the question becomes, we could probably medically cure the pneumonia, or does one allow nature to take its course, to allow the person to transition? These are the things that we begin to think very much about. Is this the way? Is this the difficult decision we need to make? How much treatment do we want to do? Do we need to do for the patient involved? And one of the things that Rabbi Dorff makes the point on is that bear in mind that what's killing the person, what's the cause of death, is the disease. It's not a decision that you're making. They're dying of the progression of the disease, they're not dying at the decision of Larry or Jane. Mindy, you look a little perplexed at that, or you just want to
Somebody would like to know a little bit about the Orthodox point of view about these things.
That's an interesting question, and I'm going to say that as a general rule, it's the Orthodox, worldview is outside my area of expertise. I would suggest this. I mentioned a book earlier. It's written by an Orthodox rabbi. He's very clear in laying out the Orthodox philosophy. I would suggest that, but it's so far outside of my expertise. I hate to give somebody bad information to run with. We talked a little bit about palliative care. Should we talk about that for a minute or two?
Sure.
Okay. Palliative care is the idea of making somebody comfortable. And this is one that I see on a regular basis, where we know the person is terminal. They have entered hospice care, and we know that we can see the end. We know that if the person is with us 30, 45 days from now, it would be a real surprise. We're no longer worried about treatment to cure, that whatever is going on, humanly, we don't have an ability to stop it. Everything we're doing now is about making them comfortable, oftentimes using medication, oftentimes using just old-fashioned TLC. But the emphasis, the whole thrust of treatment has changed from let's get you up and around to what eases your way, what eases the pain that you might be feeling. And one of the things that said Rabbi Dorf makes this point over and over again, modern pain medication can pretty much alleviate most pain a person's feeling. The downside of that is, and you can't ignore this, opiates degrade other body functions. They suppress respiration, heartbeat, and all that other stuff. And I'm not speaking as a doctor, but these are things that we know are going to be a consequence of using pain-killing medication. We're not trying to hasten the person's demise, but we're trying to make them comfortable. And that's very important to us. Also, let me say one more thing about palliative care, something that I see here that happens periodically. People hear the phrase, David Cohn entered hospice care. Does that, the automatic light goes on, the end must be at hand. And the number of times I've seen people make a U-turn is interesting. Either their condition improved, or whatever reason was, we put them on palliative care, resolved itself. It does happen. So hearing that somebody has been put on hospice, don't think of this as, yes, it's serious, but it's not necessarily a signal that the end of life is going to be tomorrow morning.
So we have two questions.
Yeah, I'm taking a look there.
One is decision, a 93-year-old to undergo extensive surgery or not, and therefore death.
Let's do that one first.
And my own comment would be, not all 93-year-olds are created equal. So I think, that's really, everything is, as I was taught in the NICU, individualize, every patient is different. And I think that goes not just at the start of life, but all through life.
Okay, I'm going to concur with that. Okay, that's the medical answer, is that each 93-year-old is unique unto themselves. They bring their own set of medical issues and file to the scenario. Judaically, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about what is the kavod there? What honors them the most? Extensive surgery to cure? Or is this just, if we have the surgery, it's going to alleviate the pain, but they're going to leave us in 6 months? Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there. And I keep looking back on what really honors their kavod. What honors my mom? Let's look at my mom. What honors my mom the most? Okay, what honors her dignity the most? And that would be the Judaic part of that equation. The medical part, that's an interesting one. I mean, like not all 93-year-olds are created equal, but that's one it'd be hard to pull the trigger on.
Well, so I went through this with my grandmother when she was in her 90s and needed surgery. And the first answer we got was, well, she's in her 90s. We said, yes, but she's healthier than most of her progeny who are much younger.
Mhm.
And if you do this, she's really likely to have a good outcome. And she did, and she lived another 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
They're not all created equal.
Okay. Do you want to read the next one?
I will read the next one. Has your position dealing with patients provided you more clarity about end-of-life decisions and honoring them? Or have you seen so many individuals that each person is his or her own unique situation?
I'm going to go a couple of different directions, okay? I never, and I hope I never get used to somebody transitioning. Okay, I hope I never cease feeling a bit of sadness or something go thud when somebody leaves us. Each one is unique because each family is unique. Each person brings their own spirit, their own neshama to the situation. Mindy was just saying, unique, or individualized, or whatever the phrase was. I have guidelines based on general experience, but not everybody fits in a box. Not everybody fits in that same square box. Some people are circles, some people are triangles. And sometimes I have to look at, what does this family need most? Do they need me to be very stringent, or they need me to we say Shema Kolenu, hear our voice. Do they need me to hear their voice and their suffering and their love and concern more than anything else? So there's a lot that goes into that. There's Klal Gadol, there's a general big principle, but then Kol Matzavot Michadim, every situation is unique unto itself. I'm not sure that answered the question at all, but that's kind of how the day goes, for lack of a better phrase.
And we used to say at work that the patients don't read the textbook. So everything is always, each time is different. Patients don't read the textbook.
Also, each clergy have their own experiences and prejudices that we bring to the table, and our own teachers. Okay, so I know that I'm very much influenced by the teachers that I had. I know that other people in my graduating class, we might have had the same teachers, but they got a different philosophy. They found other people more illuminating for the role they've taken on. So I think that we all bring, just as each patient is unique to me, I'm unique to each patient. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I hope so. What's the next one we have there?
And I'm going to put a little spin on it, because the question is, what do you do about siblings, children of the patient, not getting along or agreeing? But I would also say, what do you do when a spouse and a child don't agree? Because basically it's the family members of the patient.
Let's take this in increments. Moments of crisis bring out both the best in families and people and the abject worst. Moderately humorous before we leap into this. I was officiating at a funeral service, and 10 minutes before it's about to begin, the funeral director pulls me aside and says, "We've got a problem. Neither one of the brothers wants to pay for the service." Okay, it happens. I see Rabbi Ellen shaking her head, and it's like, for some reason, we did not cover that in seminary. Go figure.
I have had to officiate at 2 different services. I've had police at cemeteries. I've had fistfights between siblings at funerals. It's painful. It's really hard.
It's painful. As I said, difficult moments bring out both the best in people and the abject worst in people. There's just no two ways around that. As clergy, I'm going to address this question as a clergy. The first thing I try to do is using the two brothers as the example is to try to mediate and moderate between them and say, listen, guys, we go into the side room and I say, we have a genuine issue here. We have everybody gathered, we're ready to move forward, but I promise you, the funeral director is not going to let us move until we resolve this matter. And they came to a conclusion that worked. In my experience with families not getting along, sometimes it's a power trip going on. Sometimes there's an ego matter going on. Sometimes one sibling, for whatever reason, feels that they and they alone know best. Sometimes a child thinks that they know what's best for mom or for grandma. And you're dealing with human beings and human ego. And sometimes the challenge is to let some of that air out of the ego balloon so a discussion can take place. It's not always easy. And then, Rabbi Ellen was talking about, the fist fights and whatnot. I would almost put out there, sometimes you need to have that fight take place. I think sometimes you need to have that civil war, for lack of a better phrase, and be done with it. And sometimes that needs to be a family conclusion. Sometimes bringing in clergy, an attorney, a trusted family friend to moderate is helpful, but sometimes you just need to have it out. Mindy, what's your thoughts on that one?
I've seen families really, like you said, sometimes this brings out the best, and it can also bring out the absolute worst. And it really is, it's difficult. If they're in a facility, if they're in a hospital, if they're in a nursing home or rehab center, or long-term care facility, if they're in a hospice facility, social workers can also be sometimes very helpful.
Very nice. Very nice.
Don't discount the social workers. They can be very helpful.
No, let's build them up, because they can be that necessary buffer sometimes between two parties. They bring a lot of good talent and a lot of good work to the table. And I was just thinking of something along, being married to an Israeli-American RN and Women's League member sometimes is enormously helpful. She taught me a word early on in Hebrew, guvulot, limits. And sometimes when you have these family debates going on, there's somebody doesn't have a sense of limit, that they're pushing into somebody else's billywhack, into somebody else's territory, into somebody else's expertise. And I think that sometimes they need to be called on that. I'm married to an RN. Every now and then she will flat out say to me when I propose, oh, you know what, let's just get a number 5 needle and aspirate that. She'll turn to me and say, do you have a license? Just to remind me that I don't have a license. Okay. And I think sometimes being reminded that there are limits, and that you're trespassing into somebody else's. I think there's nothing wrong with them. Sometimes, like I said back a few seconds ago, sometimes it might be necessary to have that fight to establish what those boundaries and limits are. What else did I have on my? Talked about palliative care, hospice care. That covered most of the issues that I had. Is there something that Mindy, we didn't cover that you think is relevant?
I think we covered a lot of ground. Are there more questions, more comments, more things people would like to bring up? This is your chance.
I'm just going to do it. A living will, is that legal, or do I have to go to a lawyer to do that, or is it acceptable to the family?
I honestly, again, that's so far out of my my portfolio. I'm not sure. I would say at the very least start with an attorney in your jurisdiction and see what the particular laws that apply are there. Mindy?
Absolutely. As far as all of the legal documents go, you should definitely check with an attorney where you live, and they can advise you what you need, what you don't need. But at the very minimum, have a conversation. Have a conversation with your kids, your siblings, your spouse. In my case, like I said, this was my cousin. He never married. He never had kids. And there we were standing, overlooking the river at Weill Cornell Medical Center and having to ask him, what did he want for himself? Because we never knew that we would be the ones having to manage this for him. He really wanted my uncle to do it. My uncle was very ill at the time, people all in their 80s. My mother doesn't live here, she lives in Florida. And so, there I was standing, in his hospital room, having to have this conversation sort of unexpectedly. So at the very least, if you have a conversation, then people will know what it is you want. So at the very least, and you will know what they want if you have to be the one making the decisions. So at the very least, it's a conversation.
Well, when my mother passed away, my brother-in-law was our lawyer, and my mother had stuff written on a piece of paper. And he said, look, I can tear this up and we can start again, or you can go by what she wants. And we said, fine, whatever mother wanted, that's what we're going to go by. But we never had one argument about anything.
Lovely family. Rabbi Ellen, your hand is up.
I just wanted to say, we just have to be cognizant that we're grateful that Women's League is across North America. So the laws in America and the United States and Canada may be different, and
Yes.
different states may be different too.
Oh,
So
I'm aware of
definitely appreciate your question, Marion, but it might be different in Canada
Yes,
than it is
it
in North
is.
America.
that. It would be, yes. I will
Yeah.
look into it, yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, we use the phrase minhag hamakom, a custom of the place. So
Mhm.
listen, just something as very basic as you go to a funeral. Is the casket opened or closed? Here in Southern California, in Los Angeles, I've yet to see an open casket Jewish ceremony. I was at my grandmother's funeral in Chicago, and I was shocked to see an open casket. Minhag hamakom is very much in effect, and whatever custom we might be using in my zip code might not apply to somebody else's postal code.
Thought I saw somebody with a hand up before. Lorraine?
Yes, my grandson's got to make a very hard decision. His mother's quite critical. She's in ICU with the DNR, but they found some bleeding. So the question is, they can address it, which is an easy test, but they have to take her off the DNR for 24 hours. And one of the reasons she was put on the DNR and put and incubated was that she was in such agonizing pain. So it's a horrible decision that he's got to make. And like, there's always the possibility that she can recover. She's in her early 60s.
Judaically, it sounds like you're doing treatment for recovery, and that certainly makes sense to me that you would, if you're treating for recovery, that you anticipate the person making a full recovery, and let it be so Rafah Shlema, that doing what sounds like you're describing a straightforward procedure to cure would make sense to me.
Thank you.
All right. So Lynn Stein has her hand raised.
And now I'm unmuted. I just wanted to share with all of you the experience I had with my aunt. My aunt was my mother's sister. She was married. Her husband was deceased. She never had any children, and she asked me to be the executor and the decision maker. And one thing she was very clear about is that she wanted no extraordinary means when she was dying. 6 weeks before she died, she had a heart attack, and the doctor called the following morning. She was living in an assisted living facility, said that wanted to know what the next step was. And I used that line, she wanted no extraordinary means. And he said, then she's well enough to go back to the assisted living facility. 6 weeks later, she developed some internal bleeding. She went back to the hospital. They did 2 endoscopies. They stopped the bleeding the first time. I can't remember really what happened the second time, but she was no longer conscious when she came out of the second procedure. And the doctor said, well, if the only way to make sure that we stop the bleeding is to do a more invasive procedure. And I said, no, because my aunt said no extraordinary means. She was unconscious, and they moved her to the hospice facility in the hospital, and they put her on a morphine drip. The nurses were very good. They took off her wedding ring immediately because they said otherwise the fingers will swell. And when I spoke to her, she'd been there a couple of days, and I told her that her husband was waiting for her, and that my grandparents were waiting for her, and my parents were waiting for her. She died within about 6 hours. And it was exactly what she wanted me to do for her. And while it was sad, it made me feel very comfortable. And I would encourage everybody to be that specific with the people who will be there to take care of you. So
Thank you for sharing. Beth Goldberg has a hand raised, so let's try and keep things to more generalized comments if we can.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I want to share an experience I had with my husband who passed away 4 years ago. And he had fallen, and he was in assisted living. He was in his upper 80s. And I came in, and I was sitting there holding his hand. He was parked in a wheelchair opposite the nursing station. And I said, he's having a problem breathing here. I mean, it was opposite. So they took his temperature, and he had 103. So then they decided, well, we'll put him in bed. We'll give him a morphine drip, and then we'll switch him over to the hospital. At the hospital, if you enter the hospital closer to the beginning of the month, it happened to be July. Now, what was his problem? He was also having some bleeding and urinary bleeding. And so we called on our son, who was a urologist. I said, they want to operate on him. And he said, in the beginning of the month, any month, there's a new batch of interns. So they're very eager to perform procedures. So don't let them do that to him. He's in a very vulnerable position. And thank God he told us that, because 2 days later he died. So, I mean, thank God we didn't put him through that torture.
Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to, it's 20 after 9. I'm going to, if this is okay, I'm going to ask Rabbi Ellen to say a few words to close us out.
The end of life is terrible. None of us want to really think about it. And as many of you may know, I was a congregational rabbi for 18 years. It was a lifetime. And during that lifetime, I did a lot of funerals. There were some days that I had 2 to 3 funerals because I was working in elderly communities. And it was really important that people had quality of life, not always quantity of life. And it's really important. I think that's why I don't sit still, because I've learned carpe diem, that you got to seize the day and really enjoy each moment. And it's not the length of the moments, but the quality of the moments that we keep and we spend. And it's honestly very personal. I know that the doctors say one thing and the Judaism says another, but it's very personal as to what you feel that someone's living really is. And it's not always living being tied up to machines all the time. It's really the quality that you have. And while we can all now, God willing, appreciate our breath, that we should really cherish each breath that we take and the breaths that then the people that we take those breaths with, and really just savor and love every moment and kiss the people around us. And if you feel comfortable during this time of COVID, whatever time of COVID we're in, I haven't gotten my update from Mindy this week yet, but to really even blow a kiss and just show appreciation. And I know I look around the screen here with all the Zooms, and I appreciate all of you, and just know that it's the quality that we have. It's not always the quantity. And I know that one thing, the quality we have, is the quality of the program this evening. So thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for everything, for sharing with us. And Mindy, thank you as well. And may you have a true Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of peace and restfulness and joy. So thank you, Mindy.
Thank you, Rabbi Ellen. Thank you, Rabbi Ron, for being here. We really appreciate all your insight and your experience that you brought to us tonight. Thank you, Debbie, for again, not flinching and for introducing me to Rabbi Ron. And thank you to everybody for coming. This presentation has been recorded and will be available shortly on the website. So thank you to Karen Bellina, who does that for us, and wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, and stay warm and dry if you're somewhere cold and wet. Stay cool if you're somewhere that's a little warmer, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Mindy,